let's take a moment to introduce our speaker. Dr. Arlen Meyers is a physician entrepreneur and founder of the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs, has a very storied career, and I met him recently, and he is going to talk about the convergence of AI and MedTech and what it's going to do to our little industry. And we had a fascinating talk a couple of weeks ago, and I thought that he would make a fantastic guest and that a lot of you are going to have things to add to the conversation. And I think this is going to be one of our better talks. That's all I'm going to say. And why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got to where you are? Starting with, I was born a poor child.
Yeah, right. Well, thanks for the kind introduction and welcome to the group. So here's the short version. Grew up in Philly. Parents of Eastern European immigrant kind of thing. So it was like the immigrant story. I eventually I went to med school and college back east, and then I'm an ENT facial plastic surgeon by training. I wound up finishing my training. I got recruited to Colorado, the University of Colorado, where I spent the next roughly 40 years being an academic surgeon. During that time, and so I was a typical academic surgeon, publish or perish, and all the stuff that academics do. So during that tenure, myself, again, short story, and several other people invented a gadget that optically detects cancer in the mouth. It's like a Geiger counter for cancer. And that experience kind of led me to where I am now. And I can go into all the details, but where I am now is that I don't see patients anymore. I stopped seeing patients in 2015, and I'll tell you why. But I wound up doing what I'm doing after multiple career pivots. I teach healthcare innovation and entrepreneurship. I consult and advise to multiple companies. And I co-founded and run the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs. The Society of Physician Entrepreneurs is an international, open, anybody can join, including anybody in this audience. It's an open ecosystem. So it's an international, open, nonprofit, 501c6c3, biomedical and clinical innovation ecosystem. And the problem and the mission is to help our members, $80 a year, cheap, help our members help other members get their ideas to patients. The problem we're trying to solve is that most white coats, data scientists, engineers, graduate students, doctors, anybody, health professional, every single one of them thinks they have a good idea. Most of them don't. It's just an idea. It has little or no potential commercial value. And even if it did, they wouldn't know what to do with it, including me. So that there's nothing worse than a reformed sinner. I was clueless because I thought it was a good idea. And that's what I did in the trenches. And I want a gadget that can detect oral cancer. And I don't want to have to go through some big rigmarole to do it. So we created this gadget, but we never got it over the goal line. And that frustration of getting it over the goal line led me to what I just described.
I want to thank Paul while you were speaking. He shared 2 links for our friends to learn more about you, including a link to your paper. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I'll put the link to...
It's good to see you again.
Hi, how are you?
Good. I was involved. We were chatting with Arlen 4 or 5 months ago with my involvement with an interesting company called Protexa Health.
Right.
It has a robot medical device for...
and I'm an advisor, just in disclosure, I'm an advisor to Protexa and a number of other companies. It's kind of what I mentioned. It's kind of what I do, which is a whole other subject of non-clinical careers, how do you get doctors involved with techies, the whole rigmarole. We can have that conversation if you want.
Arlen, if you don't mind me saying, I haven't seen Lee Stein on one of these calls in maybe a year and a half. So Lee, I'm going to ask you again to join the panel because I know you have something to contribute to this conversation. So Sean, you were saying that you and Arlen met. What conference was it at? Which conference did you recently see Arlen in person?
No, I didn't see him in person. I can't remember exactly how we got
Yeah,
introduced.
I think it was a LinkedIn thing, or I wrote something and you responded, or I responded to something you wrote, something led to another. It's kind of how we got together.
Like most of my connections, we met through LinkedIn.
Yeah.
I'm going to put up some links to a webinar that we're doing, two-part webinar that we're doing next week, starting with nailing your value proposition. This ties into directly what he just discussed, which is MedTech entrepreneurs not understanding what their value proposition is. And
Mhm.
part two is getting paid for your medical device. And so it's market access, but it's specifically related to understanding if you have a viable product and if it's anybody's ever going to buy it, you know, because you can have the greatest idea in the world. Michelle and Renee have talked about this. But if nobody's ever going to adopt the technology for a variety of reasons, and you're never going to get paid for it, then you're going to spend a lot of years and a lot of money breaking your own heart.
About, I think it was maybe 8 or 9 years ago, I was moderating a panel. It wasn't my event. And I posed a question to some VCs. I said, I have this big group and people think that I know everybody and I can get them in touch and I can, all these things. And sometimes I'll have an entrepreneur, a physician say, I've invented this thing. I use it in my practice. It's helped so many people. I'm looking to commercialize it. And I said, but I see that they have no management structure. They have, no IP protection. They have no prototypes, haven't started, they don't have money to, and I said, I don't know what to say to them because I don't want to crush their spirit. What do you recommend? And to a person, they all said, crush their spirit. You're doing them a favor. Tell them the truth about what you see, given your background and your knowledge, so that they don't squander their youth, vitality, and resources on an idea that will never go anywhere. Arlen, would you agree?
Yeah, I would. And it's radical candor or whatever. And if you're an advisor, that's what you get paid to do. And if you don't, you're not doing your job. So it's, hopefully they get it. A lot of people don't get it.
Mhm.
And that leads to the question is, why don't people learn from their experience? Why don't people listen? And we could have, that's a whole long conversation, but
Yeah.
that's the truth.
I'm afraid I know more than one mercenary who would string the person
Yeah.
along with
Right.
some consulting fees about something that.
Well, a lot of it has to do with the Dunning-Kruger effect. You don't know what you don't know, but you're not willing to admit it. And doctors are notorious for that. We've been told we're the smartest people in the room since we're 8th grade. Well, guess what? In this era, there is no smartest person in the room, particularly because we have artificial intelligence.
Yeah, which brings us to our topic today. So let's use that as a launching pad, please. Start that conversation for us, Arlen. Where would you?
So the risk, where I think we should start is just some general overview of how do you incorporate artificial intelligence into whatever it is you're doing, and what are the intended and unintended consequences. The latest example I've seen, I have this thing where sick care, and I describe what we have as a siloed sick care system of systems.
Mm-hmm.
It's not in the industry, no, it's a sick care system.
Mm-hmm.
We're now at 5.6 trillion, probably going to be 6 next year. 95% of it is spent taking care of sick people, not prevention, not chronic disease management, not all the other stuff. So it's a sick care system with all the bells and whistles and works that goes with it. Now, so I say that sick care, like any industry, cannot be fixed from inside. It has to be fixed inside out, outside in innovation. But the counter to that is there's a lot of what I call non-sick care entrepreneurs. That is, people who are not healthcare professionals. And we're seeing a lot of those folks getting into the game to try to, best case, do their best to fix a very broken system. So it's techies, it's entrepreneurs, it's investors, it's people that, you know, made gazillions of dollars, like the guy on Shark Tank, who made a lot of money doing cybersecurity and now wants to do it in sick care. The problem with that is that there's a lot of positive things that come from outside in. GPS, telemedicine, you name it. I mean, most of the significant improvements in sick care have not come from really smart doctors. It's come from people that have done other things in the Department of Defense, in NASA, in tech, in cyber, in all, like artificial intelligence is the latest example. So the good news is there's a lot of good stuff that comes from outside in. The bad news is there's a lot of bad stuff that comes from outside in. And the latest example, and I just wrote a thing about this, is there was an article about cars, automobiles. And all of us who own cars now understand that if you buy a new car tomorrow, it's no longer an automobile. It's what's being referred to as a mobile transportation device. Now, that doesn't quite have the same ring as, you know, the BMW, the ultimate driving machine, but that's what it is. It's a computer on wheels. And all of the complications that go with that, I think, are burning out car owners, just like digital health and artificial intelligence is burning out doctors. And incidentally, it's burning out patients. The latest example is, for example, if you have diabetes and you're using a transcutaneous glucose monitor, if you think about the burden, and that's what it's referred to in the literature, it's a patient burden. I call it burnout. I have a friend who has diabetes. He uses a transcutaneous glucose device that's hooked up to an iPhone that tells the user what your glucose is at any point in time. Well, guess what? He doesn't comply with his diet. He doesn't comply with insulin dosage. So guess who assumes the responsibility of monitoring his glucose? His wife. Or it could be a person 1,600 miles away. So I think we need to rethink what I call with this AI MedTech, and I call this biopharma tech med, not MedTech. Sick care has become a data industry that happens to take care of patients. So it's no longer putting metal in a hip. It's a different deal. And you sort of have to understand, not the least of which is what I call the burnout impact factor of your device or idea or drug or digital health solution.
Arlen, I think you're making an important point, and I want to make sure I track with you. You're talking about burnout with the device, and the colleague that you refer to has an automated system monitoring his glucose. Doesn't it have an alarm or something that says when something is precariously low? Why are we relying on his wife? I didn't track that.
It has an alarm, and his wife suffers from alarm fatigue. What I'm saying is that the use of it, well, it's the same thing in medicine. I mean, you keep getting alarm fatigue from signals that really you shouldn't get. They're not properly filtered. So it's the same, but she has to deal with it. And he is, and that's just, I mean, that's a compliance issue. That's an adherence and compliance issue. And you probably know that 50% of patients don't take the medicine they're prescribed. In fact, they throw it away. So who knows how many people actually use the device that they're supposed to use if it involves these various AI or digital health applications.
If I could jump in, just because I have the device, I use it in the diabetes device, and it has made a life-changing. I'm trying to get your point. I'm with Joe on this. Trying to get your point. So on one hand, you said the data is good because the data has changed my life, right? And you're right, the monitor goes off. I mean, good Lord. I mean, we have now switched. I have to put it on today because I don't turn it on I don't put it implanted new
Correct.
at night.
Right.
There's a learning curve, and I can't sleep. The alarms go off at all the time and stuff like that. But my numbers have changed, right? So there's the benefit of that,
Right.
right?
Does a
Uh,
Dexcom machine,
Well,
Paul?
so what I'm saying is,
it's this like I got to insert mine on. I got the Dexcom,
yeah, it's like a
The
Dexcom.
Dexcom.
Right. Right.
right?
Right.
Life
So,
changing. I get your point, but the numbers have shifted. The numbers have shifted, right?
correct. Right.
And
Correct.
there's
But you're-
there's this element of I don't know co-management, or
Right.
being able to start interacting with the data. It's a new skill we have to develop. It's a whole new relationship with our own health, augmented with data.
But the
It's interesting
literature
yesterday.
is indicating
Oh,
that there's a
I'd love
compliance.
to hear Arlen's reply, Nellie, if you'd
Yeah,
hold.
thank you. Sorry.
The literature indicates that there's a compliance burden. That's what it's called. You're a smart guy. You have the wherewithal. You have the money. You have the knowledge. You can speak English. You have access to the internet, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But if you take someone who does not have those things,
Yeah.
you're screwed.
It's definitely not something for everybody.
Well, it should be,
Agreed.
right? I mean, the last I heard, doctors are supposed to distribute care equitably.
There's a huge learning curve in learning how to manage the data. I'm totally with you on that.
Right. That's my point. And worst case, it leads to patient burnout. They get frustrated. And they don't, it's another obstacle to compliance.
Yep.
I'd like to ask Jose, who specializes in making devices of this kind. I'm surprised to hear, I think of Dexcom as one of the names that cracked the code and have really made a difference in patient health. Why do you think that alarms are going off all over the place? I'm not a user, but why do you think it's so sensitive in the bad way?
I mean, I think, yeah, usability is kind of the key here, and understanding all of the various types of users. Because, as Arlen just mentioned, if you've got a user like Paul who's tech savvy and he's, he likes data and that kind of stuff, then it's a great instrument. But if you take somebody who's my dad and he's 82 years old and he barely knows how to handle his phone, then it's a different one. And so it's a challenge on manufacturers to really be able to develop devices that satisfy both ends of that spectrum. And and also you run into a challenge sometimes when too many engineers are the ones trying to do some of the usability, because they're like, oh, it's simple, you just change this setting, right? I mean, and I think it's a lot of us who are maybe more tech savvy, you think, well, like, yeah, you should be able to change the alarm systems and in the phone or whatever. But if you're kind of a person who's not very tech savvy, you might not even know how to arrive at that. So
I have
it's a
to call
challenge
on
that every tech company faces. Yeah.
I have to call on Sue because she's an entrepreneur and she just created a device. She just took herself off camera. Maybe she'll come right back. And the usability testing wasn't among fellow engineers. It was among the people who'd be using her product. So
Yeah, I don't mean the usability testing. I mean the design,
Yeah.
right? And usability testing is just sort of like, okay, are people able to use it? And by the way, the criteria usually for usability testing is if they screw this up, is somebody going to get hurt? And so some of the stuff around fatigue, for example, that Arlen's talking about, you might not see that in a single visit usability test, like summative usability testing, because that might not be a thing that happens until 3 months after you've been
that's
using the device.
interesting.
Yeah.
That's a good point. Nellie, you've been patient.
So I literally was just talking to my naturopath. I've been on a journey for 2 years of getting healthy weight loss. And
And you look fantastic.
Thank you. But I threw a tantrum. And what it means is, as a human nature, we have so many elements in our lives that are controlling us. Our computers, our cell phones, our refrigerators, our medical devices, that you get to a point where it's like you're so burnt out, you just shut down and stop doing. Like, I literally, a whole month, I didn't take my vitamins, I didn't do anything. And then I've gained 16 pounds. And so it's just like, wait a minute, Ellie, what's went wrong? I got tired of doing the right thing. I got burnt out. And so, I mean, it's a kind of a natural thing in human nature. And I saw it with my senior, because I was a caregiver for 2 seniors. And it's the same thing. They'll be really good for 3 to 4 weeks, and then they get burnt out and they don't want to do it anymore, or they feel controlled or manipulated. It's a psychic that you have to deal with. And so I call it rebellion. They want to rebel. I think Arlen's calling it burnout. I think it could actually be
It's
both.
calling it techno fatigue here in the comments. Do you have an idea, Arlen, a solution to this? Do you think AI can play a positive role
Yeah.
in reversing techno fatigue?
Yeah, I have a lot of ideas. I mean, but I want Carrie to, because I don't want to tie this up too much. Carrie, what is your thought?
I'll tell you from the regulatory reason why we have all these alarms and crap, I'll call it. I helped get cleared the it was EOS Health with Livongo, which was the Teladoc that sold for 18.1B, as well as the Dexcom 4 device. It's the regulatory burden is why we have all of these alarms and stuff, which goes back to the ISO for the glucose monitors, and we have to have all the alarms. And
Yeah,
it's
so-
all in the
Right.
performance and the regulatory burden.
Right.
And when we were trying to put all the alarms, when we were going into these when we were having them all to go over the counter, so we could have them, so you have them on your phone and they can go over the counter. That's what the FDA, we went back and forth probably 5 rounds with the EOS Livongo device, so that it would be, we had the providers so that they could, it could be at the household, let's say, so you at Paul could do it at home. And you could push it to whoever you want to, so your wife could now be your care person to do it, if that makes sense. And so I mean,
Reg affairs, you know, to her point, the answer to your question, Joe, one is, I mean, there's a lot of ways to deal with this, but one is rethink reg affairs, particularly as it applies to software as a medical device. There was a long article that was recently written that appeared, I think, at JAMA. The former commissioner of the FDA made the point that are we over categorizing AI solutions as software as a medical device? And secondly, since there are so many direct-to-consumer devices, should we separate the regulatory burden between direct-to-consumer devices, all the stuff you see at the Consumer Electronics Show, versus medical-grade consumer devices? Now, I don't know the answer to that question, but that's a potential solution. Two, I think that the safe and effective burden at best is kind of minimal. I would like to see safe and effective and cost effective, because I think there are way too many shiny new objects, and there's no Moore's law in sick care. In other words, we just keep piling more stuff on and spending more money. So I think, like other countries do, we should have some sort of cost-effective analysis that would further inform whether this, as a whole long list, but I'll give you a third one, and that is there are significant gaps between scientists, engineers, and healthcare professionals in mindset. And there simply is not enough collaboration. Techies are from Venus, doctors are from Mars. It's like being married for 30 years. And if you don't talk to each other, and if you don't inform each other in terms of subject matter expertise, in terms of the ecosystem, in terms of workflow, then that's a problem.
I really have to thank Sean. I've known you for more than a decade, and it took him to get you to join our program. You just raised so many points that we could go off into different directions, but let me hold my tongue and ask Dr. Carr what she has her hand raised for.
Well, you asked me to talk about the human factor studies. So we went to FDA, and they requested that we conduct 15 more human factor studies, which we're going to kick off and finish next week. So I'll know next week if we're pretty much if we're going to be approved or not. If we have 100% success, I think it looks good. Our first test we completed. I've known Arlen, I've known you for a few years. I joined SOAP in the Washington, D.C. area with Jeffrey Housefield in 2018. And
Good for you.
so we're
Thanks
good
for joining
friends.
us. Yeah.
Um,
So let me
so
just make
thank
a
you
point
for
of,
what you do.
oh, sure. So let me just make a point about this human factors testing. So coincidentally, 2 weeks ago, I was invited by a friend of mine who does MedTech commercialization to be a person that was going to be one of the people to do the human factors thing. And you show up at a hotel room in Denver, and this device is a smoke evacuated device for a electrocautery scalpel. It's like a Bovie, but there's a smoke evacuator that goes with it. And the basic problem they were trying to solve was that when you cut skin or you cut an organ, now let me refresh your memory. I'm a surgeon, so I'm kind of familiar with what this looks like in the operating room. And the idea was we want to get rid of the smoke when you make an incision. That was the basic idea. And I got to tell you that all the time and effort that went into that device, first of all, it was an incredible amount of disposables, which brings up the whole net zero medicine conversation. Secondly, what I was asked to do was, Arlen, we want you to sit down, use this device. I saw a 6-minute video on how to use it. No, it was not a human kidney. It was some kind of meat or different textures. You make a couple of incisions and then you grade it. Well, I got to tell you that I think that's a pretty minimal bar. And I filled out the form and I said, as far as I'm concerned, this gets to Joe's question of what were you thinking? I mean, this thing is ridiculous. I can't believe that they spent all this time and effort and money.
Now you're talking like my New York head.
It's like ridiculous. Yeah. Well, I came from Philly, so we're kind of used to the same
We're
thing.
both assholes. Sorry.
Right. Exactly. Just tell it like it is. You don't like it. Talk to me. So, buy a pretzel. But the point is, I just thought it was so ridiculous. But that just adds cost. It adds regulatory burden. It adds inconvenience. It really doesn't help. So I just question that whole thing. And I guess that rule was recently changed or they had to upgrade it. And it didn't really provide them with the input. I think they would, but I'm sure they did. I mean, these people aren't stupid. They see how these things work. They see how jobs get done. They see the workflow. They see the potential issues. And then to come up with something like that, I just think is criminal. It's a shame. It's just an incredible waste. And we have to pay for it.
Victoria, if you take yourself off mute, I don't know if your camera's working.
Oh.
I think this is the first time you'll be contributing to our call. Introduce yourself to the group and then share your thought.
Okay, so my name is Victoria Zandi. I'm from the Detroit metro area, and my company, Alberta Rose Incorporated, which is myself, was named after my grandmother's, and I specialize in writing, structuring, and editing for reference, presentation, and documentation with the primary focus in biomedical, biotechnology, and life science. I was a caregiver to my grandparents as well as my mother, who passed away about 1.5 years ago of COPD. So my company comes from a lot of different areas. My experience, my education, I'm an engineering physics major with a biomedical engineering intent, but I'm a writer first. And really what I wanted to address with Dr. Meyers was when you were talking about AI and the fatigue of AI within patients. And just for my opinion on it, to contribute, people with conditions such as my father was a heart patient, and they're dealing with the condition as it is, which is a challenge. And then to have some type of artificial intelligence, within them and to deal with that. So I agree with him there, in that AI will never really replace a human because humans have created AI. So I think we'll always be 1 or 2 steps ahead of that, and to use it within the context that it was created.
Let me just comment a little bit on this AI collision with MedTech and biopharma. There's a couple of, just again, a couple of issues. One is, what are the success factors so far? Because we're in their infancy with this, but so far, what are some success factors that are associated with successful deployments of an AI solution in a healthcare environment? McKinsey is all over this. Most of the PwC people, I mean, they just, every single day they write more stuff. And they actually came up with 10 best practices. But I will tell you that 2 or 3 of them that I think are pretty important are, one, governance. In other words, who is running the show when it comes to AI? Is it a CEO? Is it a chief AI operations officer? These days now, there's an international association of AI certificated officers. Is this everybody's business? Who should? So governance is a really important part, and particularly with the CEO buying into the deal. Now, let me remind you that the 2 biggest issues, and I'm talking to these people. In fact, next week, I was asked to be on a panel to talk about what do members of boards of directors of healthcare organizations need to know about artificial intelligence. And that's a whole nother conversation. But the point is, this is about risk management. And the risks involved with the deployment of artificial intelligence to sick care are substantial. I don't need to tell you that. But the board of directors, in many hospitals, do not know anything about healthcare, let alone artificial intelligence. Particularly in rural areas, small community hospitals, they're paragons of the community. They're appointed to the board. God bless them. The hospital is a pillar of the community, but they really don't understand what's going on. So there has to be education at the board level in terms of analysis and risk mitigation for AI at the board level, let alone everybody else in the food chain. The second thing is you have to rethink workflow and process mapping, because it's just garbage in, garbage out. If all you're doing is automating stupid, wasteful, potentially harmful processes, you just make it work. And actually, when you look at the analysis of successful deployment, those 2 things stand out. There's a whole bunch of other stuff. And for example, there are AI councils now. What do you do about the ethics of AI and AI risk management to patients? Do you need a separate artificial intelligence IRB when it comes to approving IRB things and risk to patients? Do you need a separate ethics committee that understands the AI ethics part, not just should we pull the plug on grandma in the ICU? So there's various big picture topics that people are trying to get their arms around. And finally, this whole issue of return on investment when it comes to AI in MedTech and biopharma or in care delivery. My take home at this stage in time is, at this stage of the game, in some respects, it's a fool's errand trying to define ROI, particularly the money part. So in a couple months, I'm going to be speaking to annual healthcare financial management association, which is going to have their annual meeting in Denver. A bunch of CFOs of all the hospitals around the country. And they want to know, I have 2 problems. How will AI solve this problem? One, we're running on fumes and razor thin margins. That is decreasing reimbursements and revenues and increasing costs and labor costs. And 2, we can't find people to work here and stay here. So how does artificial intelligence help me solve those 2 problems? So I really think we need to get real with this. Hospitals are going under. People are quitting the profession. Patients are suffering. The sick care system is getting sicker. And we're applying this artificial intelligence, in my opinion, snake oil sometimes to solve problems that really are pretty far down the list. So I'll just get some response from that.
There's something that you said earlier that I'm very, it's been sticking with me, and maybe this is the point where I can bring it up. You talked about what you think is, I like Carrie's dog, about how perhaps we're doing a disservice by treating all AI as software as a medical device. How do you make, what is a practical way for us to approach it so that it is properly regulated, but not overly burdensome? Do you have a thought on that?
Well, first of all, most of the artificial intelligence in healthcare is not being used to take care of patients. So most of the artificial intelligence deployments are being used for operations and finance, rev cycle management, how to improve the efficiency and efficacy of workflow in a central supply area, robotics in certain areas, nursing floor, process mapping, information, all that other stuff. The actual use of it in medicine in terms of taking care of patients, so let's just be clear that there are over 1,000 now FDA cleared software as a medical devices. 70 to 75% of those are in radiology. And then the remaining tail are typically in computer vision, dermatology, scanning to determine melanoma versus non-melanoma, ophthalmology, retinal scanning to detect early diabetic retinopathy, pathology, auto diagnosis of pathologic specimens or frozen sections in the operating room. So these are pattern recognition applications. They're used mostly for diagnosis. When we get into clinical decision support, in other words, the difference between generative AI and predictive AI, very few doctors trust it. And actually, there are very few that are actually deploying it at scale for clinical decision support, because at the very beginning, there was this big thing about Epic rolling out a sepsis predictor model that was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And people got sick and died. So we're so risk averse that I think we kind of need to separate the wheat from the chaff and use it where it's applicable and rethink how we're going to use it actually in clinical practice.
Are you going to or speaking at Daniel Kraft's next?
Unfortunately not. He was nice enough to invite me, but no, I'm not. It's Health Tech in San Diego at the Hotel Coronado. But yeah, he has a good meeting.
Yeah.
We were there at HIMSS. But no, I'm not going to be there.
That's going to be a rich topic there. What about the notion that you brought up about potentially regulating consumer-facing devices versus medical-grade devices differently?
Right. So I have a home blood pressure cuff. Fortunately, my blood pressure, I take medicine, it's better. But I got to tell you that first, I'm not sure whether it even works. And as I understand it, the regulatory approval of a home blood pressure cuff allows the manufacturer 20% leeway off the ground truth. So when I go, if I go, another story, to an actual doctor or a facility to have my blood pressure measured through a standard sphygmomanometer, you know, the auto one that you see that the MA does when you go into the office.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know which one to trust. I don't know whether I should trust the one in the office or should I trust the one at home. And the the American Heart Association, and the American College of Cardiology, a lot of folks have looked fairly specific. They are measure of people's blood pressure. And in many, many instances, there are ones that just didn't make the grade. They didn't get the good housekeeping seal. They are not in consumer reports. And so the AHA and the ACC, they recommend certain products. But I can tell you, and I do this on a fairly regular basis, whether it's standing or sitting or lying down, or what time of the day, or which arm is it, and is the cuff on right, and all that other stuff. So to answer your question, I think we need to do a better job of validating and verifying the specs to these things. And two, we're not talking about, a washer or a dryer. We're talking about something that people are using to live longer. And I don't see why we have a separation between consumer devices. I'm not even sure what that means, versus a medical grade device. What difference does it make who uses it, whether it's a nurse, a doctor, or a patient? I think it should all have the same standard of validity.
But you're advocating for them being.
Yes, I'm advocating for the industry, and if they don't do it, the FDA is going to do it, to make sure that patients are using things, particularly as care is migrating away from the hospital.
That makes sense.
That they're their nurses now. They're their own doctors. People are doing more DIY medicine. Would the standard of what you're using to take care of yourself be any different than if a doctor did it, or a PA for that matter? The doctor isn't going to do it. In reality, the PA does it.
I have to say,
you get to see a doctor.
to those of you who are watching this recording, this is a great example of why it's good to show up live, because we've been having a rich discussion in the chat that's too much to share here. So join us live next time if you can. Sue, you wrote the white coat syndrome. I'm not familiar.
I think Arlen probably knows. When you go into the doctor's office, you're rushing in, you're late for your doctor, you sit down, you wait a few minutes, and then the doctor says, quick, go here, and then you walk down 3 or 4 hallways. Finally, you get there, you sit down, and as soon as you sit down, the nurse takes your blood pressure, and it's high. When you just took it an hour ago, and it was at home and it was low. So a lot of people get nervous about their blood pressure when they're in the hospital. They see a white coat and their blood pressure skyrockets. But it's just temporary. So I think if there needs to be training done with the nurses to say, hey, don't take your blood pressure right away. Sit down, relax, then take the blood pressure.
Right phenomenon. And actually, as I said, there are a lot of other factors that go into
so many variables.
What's going to happen to your blood? Did you have coffee? Are you lying down? Are you standing up? It's just a lot of variables.
I think another thing that's interesting about your discussion is the shift of the burden, the administrative burden, onto the patient. So for example, fill out all these forms online before you get here, confirm that you're going to be here, do all this administrative work for us. And then you get there and they ask you the same questions over and over again.
Right.
And, it's like I filled out all those forms online. Now you're wasting my time asking me the same questions all over again. And, first I go to the person who's, checking my vitals. They ask me the questions. Then I go to the PA. Then I finally see the doctor. And by the time I'm done, I've answered the same question 3 times. Plus I filled it out online. If they had just read the form about what medications I'm on, I put all that information in the online form. But it's the same with the airlines. It's the same with every industry where the burden is shifting to the consumer. So this is my point. As chronic care management and remote patient monitoring become more and more prevalent in the United States and the burden shifts to the patient, I think there has to be some level of competency among the medical consumers to take responsibility for their own care.
Yeah. So I just read an article called How to Screw Up the Patient Operating Manual. So the analogy again is, when your car, the USB port in my car broke, it doesn't work. So I can't, it's a whole other sort of stupid story. But the point is, when you go to the operating manual of my car to try to figure out how to fix this yourself, good luck. It's the same thing with a patient. The instructions that we give them after the clinic visit are undecipherable. They're too long. They don't have pictures. They're written actually at a too high a grade level to understand. Right. And incidentally, when the patient uses ChatGPT, that output is at a 12th grade reading level. And
they know to say.
Most of the time it needs to be at a 5. That's what the Wall Street Journal is. So the whole thing is just wrong. It's just not working. So I call this the patient operating manual, and we need to do a much better job.
Jose, you've been patient?
Oh, yeah, I don't know if this is too off topic, Arlen, but I'd be curious to get your thoughts. I mean, kind of home monitoring and taking medicine to the home has sort of been a goal for, I don't know, at least 30 years, maybe longer. And it seemed during the pandemic like we might make significant strides in that direction. And then it kind of seemed to drop off afterward. It really hasn't captured as much adoption. I think one of the big barriers has always been around reimbursement. And I'm just curious, what impact are you seeing with AI on both just the larger adoption of treatments and diagnostics going to the home, and then also if you're seeing on the reimbursement side some movement that makes it so that you can start to see the light at the end of the tunnel of that becoming a reality?
Well, a couple points. One, again, there is no Moore's law in sick care. In other words, we just keep piling more stuff on. Used to be, you had a problem with your hand, you got an x-ray. Now you get an x-ray, a CT scan, an MR scan, a PET MR scan, and a God knows what else. And it's an enormous amount of money. And it really doesn't give you, except in certain circumstances, that much more information. So I believe AI is certainly adding cost, and it's trashing the planet. And I'm not sure it's really solving a whole lot of problems, with certain exceptions. So so I think it's going to it is driving up costs. Now, in terms of reimbursement, now who knows what's going to happen with this administration, but in terms of reimbursement for using artificial intelligence technology, and the example that I'll give you is if you've had a screening colonoscopy recently, you'll probably, after the doctor or whomever does the procedure comes out and talks to you, they give you a picture of the inside of your colon. And so it's a video picture of all that. And artificial intelligence is being used in many instances to screen for dangerous polyps that might otherwise have been overlooked by the endoscopist. So that brings up a lot of questions. Number one, did you give the doctor approval to do that? To use artificial, did you give understood informed consent? Informed consent is not understood consent, whole nother topic. But did you give consent for the doctor to use artificial intelligence to do this? Second, who pays for it? I mean, is that included in the colonoscopy, or is it going to be a separate bill? Is there going to be a separate facility fee for it, or you're going to be stuck out of pocket? Who's paying for this stuff? Third, should it be reimbursed by a Medicare system that's going to bankrupt the country in 5 years? So nothing is free. So that's why I'm saying
the argument is that there should be cost reductions, right? That if you've got a machine that's making the job of the physician more efficient, or that's we all have stories about stuff, right? Like my dad's diabetic, he's in a wheelchair. He had surgery a couple years ago, and I remember taking him to the doctor to see a neurologist because he was having a problem with one of his legs. And it literally took us like 6 hours all in, between me driving up, getting him in the car, taking him over there, unloading him, waiting for the doctor for a 5-minute conversation that could have been done from home or probably could have been done by AI. And it's so you know, from the patient side, you get this frustration of like, hey, some of the costs and inefficiencies aren't just in the medical system, they're in the patient and the caregiver system. And you kind of have the hope that a lot of what doctors do is algorithms, that AI over time can take some of that load off, and it could result in cost reduction.
But you're talking about two different things. You're talking about patient experience, you're talking about physician experience or caregiver experience, and you're talking about cost. One is not related to the other. And when was the last time you saw your health insurance premium go down, despite all of the technology that is employed? It doesn't. It doesn't get translated. And that has to do with the system. That has to do with how things are paid for. You understand that.
We have
because we're in the age that everyone has an expectation of why can't you deliver care like Amazon delivers packages? So we have a much higher bar to cross. And because of what I call the craniorectal inversion syndrome, sick care is incredibly change resistant.
Yeah. Administratively, we're almost at the top of the hour. We have 2 hands up. Let's see if we can, Victoria, if you could be concise.
Sure. I'm just going to say it briefly. I just agreed with what everybody said when they kept talking about, just from my experience in taking care of my mom. Like Sue was saying, you fill out the form online, and my mom would sit with me, you know, and she was basically at the end of right before she passed from COPD, about a year or so. And then you go in the doctor's office and they want her to do it again. So just that repetitiveness.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Paul,
and let me just point out that the last time I got on a chat, or the last time I got on a phone call trying to get tech support or anything in industry, it's the same deal. They don't get it right either. You know, they ask you for, in order to give you better information, give us your social security number, your credit card number, whatever. Guess what the first question they ask you
What's
is,
your
if you get
number?
to a person,
I know it's maddening.
what's your social security number?
It's maddening.
Right. It's just
Paul,
maddening.
you wrote a comment. You want to share that with the group?
Well, yeah, it's, you know, we have all this tech coming in, right? I mean, devices, forms, this, that, AI. A question to you, Dr. Arlen, do you see this tide fading back in where we get a maturity model and the tech starts to fade away and we can become more human in our medical practice and the experience, like this white coat thing, and right? I mean, do you see care becoming caring?
So do I see this happening in the future where we won't even be having this conversation? Because the technology, when we get it right, will be so embedded in the care process, you won't even notice it. All you want to do is drive your car to get from A to B. You don't care how it works. You don't care how all this stuff happens. You just want to get from A to B. So it's going to be in the background, as it is in many instances now. Secondly, I think that in terms of cost and in terms of the sustainability of the system and actually getting back to caring rather than just health care, that I see a positive flow from younger generations. I deal with a lot of medical students, residents, people in pre-med, engineers, that kind of stuff. They're pretty juiced about wanting to change the system. You remember how we were when we wanted to change the system when we were 20-something years old. Right. So they're pretty good at wanting to do this, and they're very tech savvy. And they're already using large language models, much like the early days of the EHR when people were bringing their own laptops, because then you had your own bring your own computer cybersecurity issues. Same thing. So we've seen this movie before. I think we're going to have to be patient with letting people like me and older, laggards die so that the young generations can actually fix this thing. Now, the final point I'm going to make is that private practice is on fumes. So if I was in private practice for a number of years, and I believe that the corporatization of medicine, the consolidation of medicine, the private equity influence of consolidation and how the business model works, statistically and in the literature, hasn't done us any good. It's raised prices, it's restricted competition, and it's compromised care. So how do we fix that? I think we're at the point where maybe 20–25% of the private practice floor has been reached. I think people are fed up with working for the man. I think that they're suffering moral injury. And I think that they're going to go back to private practice now. So to get to the point, I think that will be the riches in the niches. There still will be standard corporatization and rates of physician employment. But I think the new frontier will be a reinvigoration of what I call private practice entrepreneurship, not private practice management. That's an operations function.
Would that be closer to concierge medicine and stuff like that?
Well, that's a different business model. And to that point, I do not believe concierge medicine is scalable. It's too expensive. It's about 6% of primary care. People simply can't afford it. It's 1% medicine. It's for people who can afford it to do it. It's not something that's going to solve Medicare. It's just not going to work. It's a niche play. It's not going to solve the big picture and be scalable.
I have to ask, I know we're out of time, but you went and said something provocative again. This notion of the pendulum shifting back potentially towards private practice and the way to stand out perhaps in this new economy. Are you, in your role as advisor and lead for SOAP, are you guiding your audience that way? Are you encouraging physicians to consider that as a
Yes.
forward?
Yes. And the point that I make is physician entrepreneurship is much more than just creating a company. The deployment of innovation using a viable business model. And you can do that as an intrapreneur. You can do it as a sick tech or a tech entrepreneur. You can do it as a social or public health entrepreneur. You can do it as an edupreneur, and you can do it as a private medical practice entrepreneur. You can't do it the old way. You just simply cannot do it the old way. The rules have changed. So the mindset is the beginning. The medical clinical mindset is different than the entrepreneurial mindset. And what I'm talking about is a correlation of the two. And if you don't embrace that mindset and supplement the clinical mindset with the entrepreneurial mindset, do yourself a favor and don't go into private practice.
Arlen, thank you. You came here with a goal to have a conversation that engaged us. Well done, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you
very much, Arlen.
Next
Sure.
week, we are going to continue our conversation with Michelle and Renee for part 2 of commercialization pitfalls. We will see you at the same bat time next week. Arlen, profound thanks. Have a good week, everyone.
Thanks for having me.
Bye
Thanks,
for now.
Arlen. Bye-bye.
Bye.